You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. After a few marathon public comment sessions last week, the Seattle City Council is considering the final version of its comprehensive plan. This is the document that the city uses to decide how it will grow over the next 2 decades. Over the last week, balancing tree canopy with growth emerged as one of the most controversial issues in the plan. And there's a history here. In 2023, Mayor Harrell and the city council passed a so-called tree protection ordinance that would limit the amount of trees developers could cut down while building new housing. But according to tree canopy advocates, 2 years since the law went into effect, tree cutting has only increased. Just in August, an average of 73 trees were being cut down each week. So what went wrong? Or is that law working exactly as intended? Robert McClure is a journalist and co-founder of Investigate West, and he joins us once again to talk about tree canopy and the city of Seattle. Robert, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for the welcome. I'm eager to talk about this.
Can you give us a little more detail about the 2023 ordinance? On its face, it's about protecting trees. What are you saying about the way it actually works in practice?
Yeah, sort of a central concept is something called a tree protection zone. And, that sounds great. And there are some various technical ways of outlining this, but basically it's where the tree's roots go and where the major roots are. And so the 2023 ordinance said you're going to draw up this tree protection area, and this is how you're going to do it. And they turned out to be quite large. And so and this is where it's kind of perverse. The tree protection area, if the building is going to cut into the tree protection area, you're allowed to just take out the tree. So it's called a tree protection area, but it was really, in many cases, a tree destruction area. And they could take out the tree without any questions asked, pretty much. So that's what led to a lot of the felling of very large trees on private properties that are being redeveloped.
So, Robert, this ordinance, the 2023 ordinance, I remember was very controversial when it passed. But there were some tree canopy advocates who said, it's something, it's better than nothing. What do they say about the ordinance today?
That it really hasn't worked to protect large trees on private properties. Replanting is required, but they're saplings, very small. And what came up from public comment for people who really are sort of emphasizing growth and the need for density over tree canopy is that we can plant a bunch of these trees now, and in 15 years, they'll be getting bigger, is basically we will grow a tree canopy. So that's the argument on that side. Then what you're doing is you're saying, well, we're going to allow these mature trees, which have all kinds of physical health benefits for people, to be cut down and replaced slowly over time.
Yeah, I want to get more information about that. I mean, there was, a conversation about the street trees that were supposed to be compensating for tree canopy loss to development. 2 years on, there were a lot of assumptions the city made about street trees. What have we discovered today about that idea that street trees will make up for what's lost to development?
Yeah, it's been a disappointing finding that came from the Seattle Department of Transportation. The Department of Transportation said, well, how many trees can we expect to be able to plant alongside the boulevards? And came up with some pretty discouraging numbers. They found out that there really aren't that many places to plant trees. And so getting up to the 30% goal in any of these neighborhoods was just not possible. The highest was actually almost 24%. And even that would require a whole bunch of punching holes in concrete and moving infrastructure in order to plant trees. So we cannot look to street trees to do the heavy lifting when it comes to increasing the tree canopy. And it's going to have to happen elsewhere.
One of the arguments for people who push tree preservation is also about equity, right? Can you talk to me a little bit about the ways that the tree canopy looks very different across our city, and if there are any efforts to be equalizing that, or at least bringing more trees to other parts of the city?
Sure. Investigate West, and before that at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, I've been writing since the aughts about the environmental justice implications of a lot of things. You get in the south end of town, it's the more diverse neighborhoods. It's also the less treed neighborhoods. And there are actually studies examining life expectancies. And the whiter, leafier northern parts of town, people live longer than in the southern and more diverse and less treed areas.
And it may seem like a pretty straightforward question, but why is tree canopy a big deal?
Well, there's been a developing body of scientific evidence over the last 25 years or so, linking tree canopy and greenery to better health. Trees measurably reduce heat in neighborhoods that have them during heat waves, so they actually save lives. They also intercept air pollution and the rains. To the degree that they don't do that, those rains go onto the street and wash a bunch of toxic crud into the local waterways.
So, again, this is a lot of background about the 2023 tree canopy ordinance and then what's happened since then, including more information like these reports that you're talking about. Now we've got that background as context for what's been going on with the comprehensive plan, like that debate that we talked about last week. So last week, the city council made some choices about tree canopy in the comprehensive plan. First, what issues were they debating?
The tree advocates were pushing for two amendments. The first one, the one that would have reserved a certain amount of room on every lot for trees and greenery, that one failed. In the vote on amendment number 102, that one actually passed on a 4-3 vote. And that is the one that gets rid of this artificially large and so-called tree protection area that ended up actually not protecting trees. And there are some other things that did too. There was a minimum building width that had been prescribed of 15 feet. And if you couldn't get at least a 15-foot wide building in, you could take down trees. And then there was it was permitted that if a developer said, well, I'm going to put in a retaining well here or something like that, that they were allowed to just go ahead and take out the tree. So this says you can't do that unless it's required by the Seattle Department of Constructions and Inspection. So it makes it that the city decides whether that retaining wall or other infrastructure that would take out a tree can be installed or not. It's not just the developer's decision anymore.
So mixed results for tree canopy advocates. I'm struck by how much just single absences shift the balance on these pretty consequential issues going forward for development across the city. What is the takeaway here for tree canopy advocates? Do they think that the narrowing of the instances, the types of situations where developers can take out trees, will that have a big impact going forward?
Yeah, the tree protection advocates are quite happy. They would have liked to have gotten both of their amendments passed. But so you can think of it this way. The first one that would have reserved space for trees in new developments, that's about what's going to happen going forward onto new developments. The one that did pass, it makes it so that when properties are redeveloped, there's a much higher likelihood that a tree can be preserved. One reason that passed was that the sponsor, Maritza Rivera, she had a provision in there that would have given the Seattle Department of Constructions and Inspections the right to require a developer to come up with an alternative site plan that preserves more trees. And that was not going to fly with some council members, Rob Saka notably. And so she took that out. And at that point, he came aboard. So that's how she got her 4-3 vote for that one. But the tree advocates are pretty happy. They would like to see something much more like Portland has, which is, I could get the numbers wrong, but I believe you have to leave 20% of the lot for trees and green space. I'd be surprised if they don't come back and try and get that in future years, but I don't know how much of an appetite there is on the city council to wade back into the tree issue.
What are you hearing from developers when it comes to these issues of tree canopy?
They think that this change is really onerous, that it will add time, costs, and complexity to their projects. They have put forward the idea that by rearranging the way they do developments, they'll have to build something called a smallplex, which is a lot more difficult and complex than your standard townhomes or duplexes. They predict that that could affect the terms of their loans from banks. And they have said that some developers may find that they're not even eligible for financing Also, the urban tree canopy is not equitably distributed, and it's the wealthier, whiter, and richer North End neighborhoods that have most of the trees, and so they see it as inequitable.
Before we go, Robert, I mean, this is an issue that, as we said, can pit development advocates with people who want to see the tree canopy expand. And it feels like sometimes we're saying housing versus trees, and that's the zero-sum game in front of us. Is there a way for everybody to get what they want out of this, for the city to see more housing, and yet our tree canopies still expand? What do you find in your reporting, or what do you expect based on what you've seen following this?
I mean, I think it depends on the site, of course. It's an individual site-specific kind of question. But there's a pretty recent development up in the Central District where the architects just very purposefully made sure they were not going to take out the trees and built around them. And that's what the tree advocates say can be done in many cases. The developers believe that they need maximum flexibility, and this has to do, among other things, with getting loans from banks. They want to know before they buy the property and get into the actual development how much space they're going to have to build. They don't want to have to reduce sizes in order to keep trees growing. The tree advocates would say in many cases, you can just redesign.
Robert McClure is a journalist and co-founder of Investigate West, and he has been exhaustively covering the issue of tree canopy for Investigate West and how the city is trying to encourage the expansion of the tree canopy while also adding more housing units. And it's proving to be a difficult proposition. Some changes happening last week through the comprehensive plan process. Thank you so much for following this for us, Robert. Really appreciate your time today, and good to see you.
You're welcome. Happy to talk about it.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.